to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. And as we say in Northern Ireland, what's the crack? Thank you for just giving of your time and just coming on. We have loved your book so much, and it is just wonderful to actually have this chance to say thank you in person. I think for us small groups, the connection, during the pandemic has been really vital, and we've probably connected more often, I suppose, maybe than on a Sunday. So your book has really been just wonderful. So yes, thank you. How are you keeping?
Thank you.
How are you doing?
You know this, Andrea, like just seeing your tweets and your encouragement online, because like it's been not ideal time for me either, definitely not ideal time to launch a book, and to see those little quotes go up and your comments, honestly, it's done my soul so much good. Like every week I was so excited, so I was like, I want to meet you all, you've been such an encouragement, so thank you so much.
We honestly, it's just been fab. So we're just so thrilled to have you with us. So yeah, I've got lots of questions for you. We've had to really condense them down, and it hasn't been that easy. So we'll just fire away. But first of all, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And one of the girls was wondering, if you could tell us what your first steps into ministry were.
Oh, that's great. Yep. So that I live near Southampton on the south coast. We have been here for 18 years. We got here when our kids were 2 and 4, and they're just in university or just graduated now. So time flies. And so my husband's pastor of a church here called Waypoint Church, which is allegedly a Baptist church, but you wouldn't really know that. It's just like a big modern contemporary church, and it's been a real privilege to be here. But I actually became a Christian when I was 19 at university, and I don't know I didn't write about it in Irrepressible. I wrote about it in my other book, Digging for Diamonds, but it was like one of those pretty dramatic conversions from quite a tricky childhood, I'd say, and definitely tricky teenage years, with lots of stuff kind of went off the rails really. And I got to university, and I often say to people, like, if you don't have firm foundations growing up, eventually you will just sink. And so at university, that was definitely a sink moment. But I met a guy at university who started to tell me about Jesus, and this is quite hilarious, actually. I definitely didn't write this in the book. I wasn't very interested in Jesus, but I was very interested in him. He was mighty fine. And so he was like, let me tell you about Jesus. And I'm like, by all means, do so. And then eventually he invited me to church, which I thought was a date. I was like, yes, that's fine. And so I went to this church, and it was literally like 15 old people and an out of tune organ playing How Great Thou Art, and nothing sexy about it at all. No welcome team with shiny, handouts on the way in. But this group of people just loved me. They accepted me and they welcomed me into their family. And if you've never really experienced family, it doesn't matter how cool or uncool it is. We all know what love feels like, and what, we all have that desire to belong. And they just, they invited me to Sunday lunches for, walks and stuff, and board games. And again, it probably doesn't sound like that significant, but for someone who was as broken as I was, and I literally was probably turning up to this little brethren church, half dressed and hungover every Sunday, but they just, scooped me up and didn't judge me and loved me, which was amazing. And so eventually I was looking over this golf course in Plymouth, in Devon, where I was at uni. And I remember looking over this golf course, and I said to God, like, if this is real, if this stuff that they keep telling me about, and that this rather nice guy, who, by the way, didn't end up being my husband, that's not the end of the story. But anyway, if this is true, what they've been telling me, then I need to know God, because it sounds too good to be true, that there is a God that would love me and forgive me and wipe the slate clean. And so anyway, I'm sat there on this bench, and this old guy walks past me and says, do you mind if I sit down next to you? I'm like, fine. And he said, you know, young lady, I don't mean to interfere. I don't live in this country. I'm something called a missionary. But as I walked past you, I just felt very strongly that I needed to tell you that God really loves you. And it was just I didn't even know that what I'd said was a prayer. Like, it wasn't even like, that wouldn't have been vocabulary that I understood at that time. But that was like earth shattering to me, which, by the way, I often reflect now and think, what if that guy had had that prompt and not done that? Like, you know what I mean? Like, sometimes we feel like God might be telling us to say something or to write something or to send that text, and we think, oh no, we're bit, you know, it's just the cheese repeating on me or whatever, and we don't do it. You know, what if that prompt that we have is like the pivot point of someone's life? We just have no idea sometimes what one sentence of faithfulness could do in someone's life if the Holy Spirit has ordained that, you know, like Philip and the eunuch, you know, if we are at that moment, we are in the right place at the right time. So anyway, long story short, went back to the uni, gave my life to Jesus. And it was as if at that point, like, God began to rebuild those foundations. It wasn't easy, wasn't quick. I'm still a work in progress, as you've probably figured by now, but it was amazing. And immediately I joined this massive church in Plymouth called Mutley Baptist Church, great big student church at the time. And I didn't really think about going into ministry. I just started to do it. So I was already a performer. I was already a singer, and I was already doing a degree in communications and public speaking. So basically I was like, back off everyone, and you need to hear my testimony, or I need to sing, or I need to do the reading, or I need to. And then I just went for the best looking guy in the church, which was my husband, and was like, we need to go on a date. And everyone was like, who is this young woman? She's 19 years old, calm down. But literally God had so transformed my life that if there was any opportunity to stand up and talk about it, or to sing about it, or to, you know, write about it, that, so it wasn't that anyone ever gave me a permission slip particularly, or sent me on a training course, or it was just that God had radically transformed my life, and you couldn't really stop me from sharing about it. And it kind of snowballed from there, because Mark went into a ministry and I carried on being Gobby. So that's kind of how it worked.
Oh, thank you, Cathy. I just love I just love your testimony. And I was just about to say, it's really radical, you know, and you've said it yourself, just that the way that Jesus just transformed your life, like, totally. And I just love the way you just describing your personality, and how, you know, sometimes we tend to think, oh, I'm too loud, or I'm too quiet, I'm too shy, I'm too, you know, but, you know, Jesus meets us where we're at. And we've been talking quite a bit about that actually throughout your book. So thank you for sharing that. Really incredible testimony. Yeah, and as you say, ministry, you just started to do it, and that's it, isn't it? That's the key. It's just taking those steps forward, and just.
And we all do, don't we? Not everyone's called necessarily to be a preacher, but you might be called to cook that meal for someone, or to ring that, you know, phone call. So it's kind of like, whatever, you know, is the way that God's wired you just keep saying yes to it, which means you're in ministry. Like, we're all in ministry. It's just that we all have different ministries. And, you know, I just think you know, the gift of hospitality. I had someone today, I went around to their house, she's having a really hard time, and they made a meal rota, and I'm like, you don't want me to make you a meal. So I bought her some Pizza Express pizzas. I'm like, take that, babe, because I wouldn't know where to start. But for someone else on this call, like, you would be rustling up a lasagna in no time. You know, we're all in ministry. It's just different.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just reaching over for your book here. So I'm just going to be so honest, probably, even personally from my point of view, but probably for a lot of us, this has been the toughest season, I would say, as a church. So as I said, this book, doing this together with these fabulous girls, led by Ruth and Carol, on a Wednesday night, has just been amazing. You know, can you tell us what inspired you or influenced you to write the book in the first place?
Well, I think you probably know this already, but I don't think anyone ever talks as much about perseverance and resilience and suffering as I do, unless you've had to, you know, deal with it, and you know some of our story. Although, you know, obviously when you're writing a book and you know that, you know, family members or different people could read it, it's definitely not everything, perhaps you would say. But when you've had to learn to be resilient, and when which all of you have, because, you know, I always say, like, suffering's not a competition. And the reason I write about my stuff is so that people can connect and empathize and not think, oh, well, it's all right for you because you've never struggled. So I just hope that I've shared enough in what I've written in that book and others for people to go, oh, okay, she gets disappointment, she gets unanswered prayer, she gets what it is to work out that God is good when life is bad. Like, you know, she's had to work through some of that stuff theologically, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, you know. So that's what motivates me to write about it, is because every time I speak anywhere or do ministry here, I'm just so aware that everyone has got their stuff. Like, you know, everyone has got curveballs being thrown at them. Everybody is dealing with their own challenges. And if I'm really honest with you, because you know that this book was written not just specifically for Christians, I wrote it so that Christians could share it in different arenas. The first time I've done that. My other books are more Christian, but I really felt God was saying, write something that Christians can use with their work colleagues or with their family members. So it's full of kingdom of God stuff, but it's not wrapped up in so much religious language. You probably spotted that. But I really felt like, if I'm really just going to be honest with you, that there is a lot of bad theology around suffering. And there is a lot of unbiblical theology around suffering, as if somehow we failed as Christians if not everything in our life is fixed. And, you know, we've had it all. Every time Mark walks into a room with his white stick, you know, you can, you know, the generational curses, you haven't got enough faith, you know, what sin have you got in your life, da, la, 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 la. And it's because we want to make sense. We want to go, well, if God's good and he's a loving father, then he would want you fixed. So you're not fixed. So the problem has to be you. So we put on disabled or depressed or struggling people more shame and more guilt and a burden that makes them think, well, it's my fault I'm even in this situation, which is absolutely not what I think God's heart is. And when you look at the Bible, she said in a full rant now, if you look at James 1, where it says, consider it a pure joy to go through trials, brothers and sisters, because it creates in you perseverance, and that perseverance will make you mature and complete, lacking in nothing. And we want to be mature and complete, but none of us want the training course, which is suffering of all kinds. But it's how Paul became mature. It's how Jesus was obedient to God. It's how every character in the Bible went through stuff and had to learn about God's goodness and faithfulness in that. And so I think it's a very Western, consumerist, individualist approach that thinks that we are entitled to a comfortable, easy life. And so I just feel really like challenged myself, because it's not been an easy season for us either, but also for everyone I know and for everyone I meet to go, you know what, God has not forgotten you. He has not forsaken you. You've not fallen off the bottom of his favorites list. God is with you, but here are some tools, or here are some mindsets, or here are some little axioms or thoughts that, you know, God's kind of been speaking to me over the years that have helped me, and that have, or I've been, you know, others have shared with me. You know, my friend Bev told me that when the horse is dead, dismount, and it's now one of mine now, but it was from her. So these are things that are not just from me, they're things I've collected that have enabled me to cope in a way that invites God into the challenges, so that I can grow and know more of Jesus in it, rather than being in denial or trying to spiritualize it away or just say it's all demonic attack. You know, there's got to be a way that we can maturely deal with the challenges of life as well as the things that go well. So, you know, obviously that's more Christian than I've put in the book, but that's kind of the heart behind why I wrote it. You will either be really nodding and agreeing with me, or you'll be thinking I'm absolutely off the wall, you know, crazy, but that's where I am.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. And I think the beauty of this book for us, especially at this time where everything was you know, online, that we could just invite people. And we knew, I mean, everybody, even you're looking at on the screen, is journeying in a slightly different place or different way with God.
Yeah.
And so for us, this was the idea that, you know, we could all join in with something together and go through something together. And actually, I think part of the strength in the book is that it's not heavily spiritual, you know, heavy theology, you know, because then you find you're trying to, you know, try to get through that. Whereas we've been able to talk just about what you've said about, you know, let's look at some tools, let's look at things that can help us, because we all are going to experience suffering. So yeah, you know, that has been great for us.
I'm so pleased.
Yeah, I don't know, do you have a particular chapter in the book that's your favorite, or is that too hard a question?
You know, I was thinking about this because I've had a couple of people ask me this, and it is really hard, because I think it's a kind of book that in a certain season, you know, in a certain season, I need to remember to run my own circus. In another context, I need to remember to, you know, be the thermostat in the room, you know, but if I had to really say, if I had not necessarily my favorite, but I think it's so found that whole thing about building deep foundations and really knowing who you are in God, who you are as a person, and really learning to accept that and to do that work beneath the surface that people don't see. Because I think those are the roots, aren't they, that keep you going when the storms of life come. I think if you've got those firm foundations where, like I spoke about earlier with my upbringing, I think if we don't have firm foundations of knowing we are completely loved by God and that he's made us as we are, and that we are, you know, we've got these values that really matter to us, we've got these, you know, character attributes that really matter to us, if we can really wrestle with that stuff, then it means when the stuff happens and we've got to make a choice on something, we've got something to draw on. We kind of already made our decisions about what our values are, that we're not just reacting in response to the circumstances, but we know what matters to us. But alongside that, I would have to say, and you've modeled this beautifully, the chapter Build Your Tribe, my gosh, I don't know about you, and we have had a bit of a tricky year on a number of levels. My friendships that I have built over this last few years, when I got more intentional about it, as I described in the book, they have seen me through this season, you know, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for friendships. And you just kind of think, coming out of lockdown, we almost need to like be so grateful for them that we're even more intentional about building our tribe. You know, it's like, who can we have over in the garden? Who can we welcome in? Like, if there's people who we know that we'd love to build a deeper friendship with, like, what are we going to do to actually, rather than just sitting at home waiting to someone pick me, you know, actually who can we pick? Like, who can we invite in? Because if I hadn't done that a couple of years ago, I'm just being really brave, because I was quite lonely, traveling around doing loads of ministry, hundreds of contacts, but I'd absolutely neglected deep friendships. I'm so glad that God spoke to me about that, because I honestly wouldn't have got through this last year without them. So I just commend you for what you've been doing in this group and other places. I mean, planting a church in this season must have been the most difficult thing in the world, but you know, you're beginning to build that tribe and to build those connections. And what, you know, we've learned that, haven't we, this season? There's nothing that matters more than relationships. Everything else is window dressing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think every time we would come on a Wednesday night, we would all say, oh, that's my favorite chapter, that's me. But whenever the one you're talking about, Build Your Tribe, the first paragraph of that, like I was just thought, oh my gosh, this is just about reading about my life. So, you know, I think a lot of us find that at different points of the book. We're like, oh, that sounds like me. You know, we could really identify with just the way that you had, you know, were able to just present, you know, the different tools. And so like, that's a pretty big You know, I think that's quite a skill, Cathy. So,
Oh, I think, but the thing is, it's naming it, isn't it? Because the truth is, we don't think that other people feel lonely, or that other, you know, we think that everyone else has got all of that stuff sorted. And, you know, we talk about it with our kids in the playground, but we don't really talk about it as adults. And we kind of assume that everyone else has got loads of enriching, deep friendships. But the truth is, most of us could do with more of that, a lot more of that.
Oh, absolutely. And maybe you'll have the same answer for this sort of part of the question, but we have been talking a lot about being women of influence rather than influencers, if you like, you know. So do you think, what is maybe the most significant tool in the book to help us to influence those around us?
As far as the influencing those around you, I do think that whole thermostat thing that's been a real game changer for me, because I think I always felt like I was never the one who sets the temperature. Like in my church, which is not like a vineyard church, so my husband's a pastor, but I'm not employed by the church. And you often feel like, well, what can I do? And then often when I'm traveling and speaking, like I'm only there for a day, and you think, well, what can I do? But suddenly when you realize that actually we've all got like this sphere of influence, whether it's in our home, with our neighbors, just when we're in a conversation with someone, people can leave that conversation feeling better or worse, you know, and we actually have the ability to do that. I'm not saying that we all don't snot and cry over people sometimes, like, because we do, like, you know, but just generally speaking, I don't think most of us realize the influence that we have. We think that that's for like the more spiritual or important or positioned people, but influence has got nothing to do with position. It's nothing to do with titles. It's everything to do with changing the atmosphere. And, you know, we can do that in our office by bringing donuts in. We can do that in our family by asking how everyone is around the dining table over dinner. You know, there are things, and it's so easy when life is so challenging and difficult just to respond to stuff. But, you know, I think that was the challenge for me on that chapter, to go, how can I intentionally try and tweak up the temperature a little bit in my marriage, you know, in my friendships, you know, so that I don't just become cynical or critical, commentate on what the church is doing. Oh, they could do a bit more of this, they could do a bit more of that. You know, why don't I be the one who sets the temperature rather than just commentating like a thermostat does on what the temperature is? So that has been, as far as being women of influence is concerned, I think for me, that principle has been something that's really helped me to realize that I can make a difference wherever I am. And you can too, obviously.
Yeah, we love that chapter. That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Cathy. I suppose as well, and we've already kind of touched on this when we've talked about suffering, but many of the chapters brought up, you know, different things for some of us, you know, maybe things from the past, painful things that we'd kind of forgotten about and then sort of resurfaced as we chatted, you know. So for you, was it difficult to share, you know, difficult emotionally to share some of these things? Because obviously you have shared some kind of private things about your life. Oh, we love the stories about you and your husband, and the one that's just coming to my mind now is about the drawing of the boat. So that honestly, we were all just saying that when we read it, we were all laughing about just that whole description about it. Yeah. So anyway, was it difficult to write these things, or did you find it helpful yourself?
Well, it is. I tell you what's difficult when you're writing something down in black and white rather than just chatting, is knowing what to say and what not to say, because, you know, the other people involved in those stories, you know, might see it differently. And I think there is a difference between being vulnerable and being foolish, particularly when you're in leadership. So there is stuff that I haven't talked about, and I might at some point, but I haven't yet. I think what I find difficult but equally wonderful is when I am particularly at an event speaking about resilience or persevering or whatever, is I always feel like if I share just even a little bit, it gives permission for other people to do the same. And I just think it's the most precious thing in the world when we're honest with each other, when we take off the mask and go, so this is what's going on backstage. This is how I really feel. And this is how embarrassed I feel about that. Or this is how I feel guilty. You know, I've often talked about with Mark's eyesight, you know, sometimes knowing that it's really hard for me and really frustrating for me to have to do the DIY, to get the car serviced, to, you know, always have to leave the remote controls in the right place, blah, blah, blah. And I talk about those things because actually it is really difficult, but then I just have this overwhelming sense of guilt because I'm not walking around with no sight. He is, you know, and as soon as I say something like that, anybody in the room or on the screen who's got any kind of caring responsibility for someone in their family or an elderly parent or a child with additional needs will totally resonate. They will totally resonate. Might not be the same situation, might not be blindness, but they know that they get frustrated sometimes and then they get carer guilt because, oh my gosh, who am I to feel like that? It's so much worse for them. I'm supposed to be a loving, patient, godly person and I'm so not. And just to feel seen, I think sometimes to have people go, actually, I see you, and I see those struggles. I see you, that you are doubting whether God is there when he hasn't answered this prayer. I see you, that you're trying to work out your theology and other people are giving you bad Christian answers to difficult questions. You know, for people to feel seen, I think is amazing. And so I love that. I find it difficult sometimes because the weight of people's sadness or struggles are sometimes just heartbreaking. But I also consider it to be like the most enormous privilege. Like, isn't it a privilege when we share stuff? Like, I'm sure you've experienced this over this 12 weeks or however long, when you actually get a bit vulnerable and share stuff, all it takes is one person to be a bit honest. And then all of a sudden someone else can be honest. And then and that's the power of sharing stories. And you suddenly realize, and this is where Care for the Family are so good. You realize it's not just you. It's not just you who wants to refund your toddler. It's not just you who thinks that their teenager hates them. It's not just you who, you know, it's that we are all in often experiencing similar things in different ways. It's not just you who feels lonely and would like more friends. So I think it's so powerful, the sharing story thing. And so I guess I just think, well, if I can write a few words down and my sharing my story enables other people to share theirs, and we all grow more mature and more hope-filled as a result, then, you know, that's a win. And the last thing I would say is, someone said to me years ago, don't ever trust a boxing coach who doesn't have a broken nose. And the leaders that I trust and admire the most are the ones with broken noses. They're the ones who failed. They're the ones who've found life difficult sometimes. They're the ones who have been a bit beaten up, but have managed to get up and keep going again. And all the people I admire most are the ones that have got scars, but know that God is such a God of grace, and he heals and he uses our story, our failures, our sadness to actually build his kingdom, and to give hope to other people. And that he is that treasure in our fragile jars of clay. When you've really discovered the reality of that, then you can offer that hope to other people. So I'm just rambling. I'll be quiet.
Not at all. I just love your honesty. And yeah, we talk about the power of story and how story transforms story at ACV. So yeah, I mean, we just appreciated your honesty so much, and just the reality, you know, that, and as you say, you know, there's obviously a balance of what you share, but what you shared was enough for others to open up, for some of us to say, oh, that's happened to me, or that has made me think about this time. And I think we have been able to be, you know, vulnerable with each other. And as you say, just, you know, it has helped us to feel seen, you know. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I've been thinking about the pandemic, really, and I'm imagining you did not write the book with the pandemic in mind, since it kind of just caught us all a little bit on the hop. You know, but I suppose that concept of exploring living an irrepressible life for us, as we entered that next kind of lockdown in January, you know, we really felt that it was something God was on at us, you know, to do. But has the pandemic changed the way that you view the book? You know, I don't know if that just because of the timing of when it came out, I suppose, you know, and also can you tell us about what lockdown life has been like for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it was a terrible time to bring a book out as far as the publisher were concerned, because every festival with a bookshop, all the Christian bookshops closed, every outlet where a book would normally be sold. And I really would ask you to pray for your Christian bookshops and for the Christian publishers in the UK, because I mean, I love books from the United States and I love US authors, but it's so important that worship leaders and writers and speakers in the UK, that we support them to be able to continue to minister in different ways. And they are on their knees. They're on their absolute knees after 2 years. So I really, really ask you to just pray for them. On a very practical note, go to eden.co.uk rather than Amazon or your local bookshops. I know you've got some really good ones in Northern Ireland. So if you can possibly do that, it might cost you 50p more, but they don't rip off the publisher and it keeps Christian book retailers afloat. Sounds like such a small thing, but it's like fair trade shopping your bananas. It's kind of like thinking about, if we want ministry to continue, so pandemic has been tough on ministry, festivals, speakers, writers, musicians, churches, charities, the whole thing has been really, really tough. And I came back to that chapter. I don't know whether you remember it. It was fairly early on, I think, in the book, called Learn to Play Jazz. Do any of you remember that one?
Yeah.
So that's one of my favorite chapters, about the fact that I was there trying to learn. I would turn this around and you can see my piano is I've got my piano there. But I've got my grandfather's banjo just here, and I spoke about my banjo in that, him as a musician in that chapter. So that's his, and how I was learning these pieces perfectly, and he would just play everything in any key, like bashing it about, and it was just amazing. And he could adapt, but I couldn't, because unless I had the notes perfectly written. And for me, this pandemic has been about learning to play jazz. Like the whole script went out the window, the notes got put in the bin, how we've ever done anything, how we've, especially those of us with a few perfectionist tendencies, a bit control freaky, we like to know what we're doing and when. Well, that all disappeared, didn't it? So it's kind of like working out, well, how do I play jazz? What does playing jazz look like in this system? What does adaptation look like in this season? What does fellowship look like in this season? What does friendship, what does family look like even in this season? What does my work look like, which basically vanished overnight last March, with all my income? What does that look like in this season? And it's been really difficult, actually. Church has been difficult to keep everyone cared for and feeling focused. We haven't found that easy at all. And certainly for me with kids, my daughter graduated and didn't have a graduation ceremony. My other daughter is in year 1 and 2 and has, accumulated 20,000 odd pounds worth of debt already, and really has only had about 3 live lectures. None of that's been easy. But there have just been these glimmers of grace. And when there have been glimmers of grace where you think, oh, God seems to be at work here. So prayer began to bubble up in our church. And we've got this new £6 million building. It kind of, all of a sudden we closed it. Literally, we opened it. Malcolm Duncan came over from Dundonald to preach at our opening. And then we closed it. But then suddenly we realized that our community needed help with food and stuff. So we transformed it into this community help hub, and the council used us as a community help hub. And that's just mushroomed into this massive thing. And then prayer began to bubble up, and someone in our church said, well, we can't keep going in and out of the building because of all the regulations, but we could put a caravan in the car park. So you've got this amazing £6 million building with a shabby little caravan next to it, and people going in and out of the caravan, like one at a time, cleaning it up and, you know, going in for prayer. And you kind of think, well, where is God at work? At home, in our community, outside, clapping together with neighbours we've never even seen before. Where have the glimmers of grace been, and where can we, you know, where can you nurture those? Where can you, if you're playing jazz, where can that new melody take you in unexpected directions? Definitely off the chart. It's not what's written at all. But if I follow it, if I follow where that melody seems to be going, where could it take me? And so it's been lovely to do online things, to relate in different ways, to write in different ways, and to actually to speak to people about Irrepressible, you know, in secular workspaces, Birmingham Education Authority, women's groups, conferences, all kinds of places, secular, not Christian at all, and Christian. And so God has been very gracious in creating those places that have, you know, meant that you felt like you could do something meaningful, even if it wasn't at all what you wanted.
Yeah, there's just so much, isn't there, Cathy, when we start to think back over the last, well, we keep saying the last year, but it's
longer.
It's much longer, and it's going to carry on a much longer than that as well. And yeah, you've just really touched on some really important things there. I love the caravan in the £6 million car park. That's awesome. And I think that kind of like is significant, isn't it, of so many things, and how sometimes the things where all the input was, all the value, all, you know, very much went to the shabby caravans, you know, and those were the places where life came out of, and where people were really served and blessed. So I love it. So thank you. You'll be pleased to know we're on to the last question. So I just wanted to sort of say a little bit about Coast Women. So this is our small group from Antrim Coast Vineyard, really for women, obviously. And it is a place for all women to belong. That's what we say. You know, we're passionate about journeying with each other. You know, and we want to help each other grow, and we want to help each other, you know, to discover what we're made for. And so if there was one piece of advice, a piece of wisdom, I suppose, specifically for women who are journeying with Jesus, and as I said, we're all journeying at different stages, you know, but from your experience, like, what would you say? What would be the one thing? I feel like we're really drilling down now, but like, what would be the one thing that you could just pass on to us tonight?
Well, I'd be kind of interested to know what your one things were, really, because I just think God's really been revealing a lot to us in this season. And I would go back to that James 1. I feel like I just keep returning to it. But then the other scripture I keep coming back to is it Jeremiah 17, I think, 7, where it says, find the ancient path, the good ways, and then walk in it and find restoration for your soul. And I've been keep coming back to that verse because it's find the good paths. So find the things that do you good, those ancient, you know, the things that you know that you can go back to again and again, but then walk in them, like do the next right thing. You remember that chapter, which is kind of my motto for life. Everyone's sick to death of me saying it.
Yeah, we love that. We just love that. It was just brilliant. Thank you.
I mean, it just literally, I say it about everything. We've said it today, just do the next right thing. So find the good paths. So work out what the good way is, what God is saying, walk in it, but also find restoration for your soul. You know, because I just think as women, we're really good at trying to do the right thing, especially by everyone else. We want to care for people. We want to make sure everyone's got what they need. But it isn't just about doing, it is about being. And you know, that whole thing about James 1, like even the challenges that we go through, knowing that God is growing in us, this perseverance that makes us mature and complete. Like, I really feel like God has given us some deep roots in this season. And, if you're anything like me, like you've probably prayed about things in this season in ways that you've maybe not prayed before. And I hope that we will come back stronger as we meet together, because we've had to learn to feed ourselves rather than expecting somebody in an hour on a Sunday or whatever. We've actually had to learn to take responsibility, to log on ourselves, to read the Bible ourselves, to pray ourselves. And I hope actually that will, I mean, for me, I feel like I've had to take more responsibility again. And that's helped me to rediscover that love, like for myself, rather than consuming someone else's love for Jesus, you know, on the stage and their worship. It's meant that I've had to work out how to do it for myself again. And I just think that's actually quite a good thing. There's been lots of difficulties with that as well, and not everyone is engaged. It's been very hard for our teenagers, particularly, I think, actually. Not everyone finds this on a screen a comfortable experience. A blind husband has found leading meetings on screens absolute nightmare. So it's not easy for everyone. But I hope that you have found things in this period that you would say, yeah, that's the one thing I've learned in this. You know, for me, it was getting back to the rhythms of Bible study and worship for myself, and just trying to go back to those ancient paths, those good ways, and try, with life being less traveling, to put those rhythms back in place. And I'm absolutely determined not to lose them again now. Like, I'm determined now that those rhythms that have done me so much good this last year, that they need to stay. And that's more important than anything. So I feel I have regained some things, as well as lost lots of things, mainly income. But I have actually gained some, things. I don't know whether that's true for anyone else here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's so important. And I think what you've described there has been for many of us. It's that the old ways, the old things that we would have kind of, the backups, what we relied on, were suddenly not there anymore. And very much for many of us, it's been very much, maybe not a back to basics, but like, okay, it's me and God here. So what does that look like now? What do I need to do here? And for many of us, we've just had to learn to just be and allow Jesus to minister to us in maybe different ways. And I think that, and that is uncomfortable at times, isn't it? When the noise is all out away, and the people have all gone, the building's not there, and it is very much just you and him. And I think for all of us, that has been definitely a journey.
I agree.
I'm thinking there's one of the verses during this particular lockdown has helped us a little bit, Cathy. I'm just going to share it. And it was Romans 12:11-13. It's from the Message. And so I remember just coming across this at some point and just wrote it down, emailed it to everybody. So be alert, servants. So just be alert, be cheerfully expectant, which has been kind of hard sometimes, hasn't it? Don't quit in hard times. Pray. And I think for a lot of us, just not giving up has been pretty good going. And then it just says, help needy Christians and be inventive in hospitality. And again, being inventive in hospitality is something that we've kind of had to sort of tap into. And there's incredible stories about what individuals, churches, families have been doing in that. So that was just one of the sort of more practical thing that was sort of that we had come across, those verses in Romans, just to help us have a sort of a focus, you know. But thank you so much for, I could talk to you all day. I'm sure
you'd all be asleep pretty soon now, I think, probably.
Not at all. We just are so grateful that you've come on this evening and just given up some of your time. So just thank you so much.
Well, I'm signed up. I want to move over and join Coast Women. So
great. You're next up. Absolutely. Thank you.
Well, I hope
Thank
you
you.
have found it helpful, and I hope that, you know, when things loosen up, that you do continue to meet, and that it be, I mean, I just can't wait to hear what God is going to do, like in you and through you and in this area. I just think this into a new season, to have built this kind of vulnerable relationships together. I just can't imagine how God's going to use what he's knitted together, you know, for his purposes in this next season. I just think it's extraordinary.